Namaskar.
Namaskar.
Yes, namaskar.
Harsha, we are live now on YouTube.
Thank you, Ravi. Thank you very much. 1 minute to go, sir.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone.
Being free.
Evening. Rahu Kalam is over.
We are good to go, sir.
Right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, Dr. Srinivas Reddy. I know it's early in the morning in Rhode Island in the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the eConnect series. And today we are having a very interesting talk on one of the South India's, or probably the whole of our country's greatest kings, Krishnadevaraya. We have had a number of talks on, from the last 2,000 years. We talked about the Chola Empire. Then we also talked about the relationship with China and the trade that we had ages ago. We had a talk on archaeology as well, archaeology as such. Today is going to be a very interesting subject that we are going to have the privilege of Dr. Srinivas Reddy speaking to us. And at the outset, Dr. Srinivas Reddy, I could not recognize you because you lost your beard. So I have seen you only with the beard. And when I saw you in that meeting with Mini Menon, I saw that interview with Mini Menon. You were with the beard, and I was looking around for a beard I couldn't find. And you're looking nice and handsome. Thank you very much for accepting to speak to us. I know we are disrupting your Sunday morning. It's Sunday morning, isn't it? Yes. Yeah. Okay. So, but we are very greedy guys, and we look forward to a very interesting 1.5 hours with you. There are a lot of people who wanted to listen. And in fact, there is one, let me say, a co-author, I would say, who's also writing about this great king. So welcome, Dr. Reddy, and thank you for accepting to speak to us. It's a privilege to host you. I hand you over to Wing Commander Harshavardhan, our secretary, who will introduce you.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this Sunday episode of our eConnect series of the Armed Forces Veterans Officers Association of Chennai. Very special good morning to Mr. Srinivas Reddy, sir. It's great to have you on our show, and we sincerely thank you for having accepted our request, and you have so kindly consented to share your thoughts with us. Well, ladies and gentlemen, before we move ahead, I will give you a small introduction about Dr. Srinivas Reddy. Dr. Srinivas Reddy is a scholar, translator, and musician. He began his musical training as a guitarist and composer. In 1998, he graduated from Brown University with a BA in South Asian Studies and completed a senior project entitled Nada Sat, a multi-instrumental ensemble piece that reflected his growing interest in South Asian philosophy and music. After moving to San Francisco in 1998, Dr. Srinivas met his guru and mentor, Sri Partha Chatterjee, a direct disciple of the late Sitar Maestro Pandit Nikhil Banerjee. Since then, he has dedicated himself to Indian classical music and rigorously trained with his teacher in the traditional Guru-Sishya style. Dr. Srinivas is a professional concert sitarist and has given numerous recitals in US, India, and Europe. He has 3 albums to his credit: Geeta, released in 1999, Sitar and Tabla in 2001, and Hemant and Jog in 2008. In 2011, he graduated from UC Berkeley with a PhD in South and South Asian Studies. Under the guidance of Professor George Hart, he studied Sanskrit, Tamil, and Telugu literary traditions and completed his thesis on the Vijayanagara Emperor Krishnadevaraya and his grand Telugu epic, Amuktya Malyada. A translation of the works entitled Giver of the Worn Garland was published by Penguin Books in 2010. With the same publisher, Mr. Reddy has also released 2 translations in the complete Kalidasa series, The Dancer and the King and The Cloud Message. His most recent work is Raya, a critical biography of Krishnadevaraya of Vijayanagara. Dr. Srinivas is a guest professor of South and East Asian Studies at IIT Gandhinagar in Gujarat and visiting assistant professor of Religious Studies and Contemplative Studies at Brown University. He lives in Rhode Island and spends his time performing, teaching, and conducting research around the world. With that short intro, I now once again welcome Dr. Srinivas Reddy to our show. Welcome to you, sir, for this E-Connect series of the Armed Forces Veterans Officers Association. And now it's all over to you. After you finish your talk, we will have the question and answer sessions. Ladies and gentlemen, kindly mute yourself.
Dr. Reddy, I'm a proud owner of your book. I wanted to finish it before your talk, but I got busy in something. I'm halfway through and thoroughly enjoying it. And I'll be very happy to share it with any of our members as soon as I finish reading. Thank you. All yours.
Thank you so much, everyone. I think that's the longest introduction anyone's ever given me. So, Wing Commander Sir, namaskar, and thank you very much. Dhanyawad. That was very impressive. And thank you very much, Vartaman Sir, for first initiating contact and requesting me. And of course, thank you to all of you who are on the call and listening. We can, you know, as a civilian, I will say, I have nothing but really just incredible awe and respect and gratitude for all of you. You have given, I think, you know, the highest offering that one can give to country and to fellow men and women and humanity. So thank you very much. It's an honor to be with you. So today I'll talk about a man who I've become very, I feel, intimately connected to, having worked on his literary work and studied him historically. You know, when you write a biography of someone, you really, you know, you kind of try to get into the mind of the person. So it's a pleasure to speak to you all. I have a presentation which I'll go through. You know, honestly, I would love to engage with all the questions and comments that you might have. So I'll try to keep my speaking fairly limited, and then we can maximize discussion time, because that usually leads to much more interesting things. And it's fun for me also, and we can get into some discussion. So let me share the screen if I can. Let me see. Yeah, I can. And we can start. Are you able to see this, sir?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
There it is. Thank you.
Okay, let me even see if I can make it even bigger. So, okay. So I hope this doesn't move forward. Sometimes it does that, but let's see. Hopefully it won't. So the title of the talk is Krishnadevaraya Vijayanagara, a global leader, which Vartaman sir was excited about, and I am too, because it's kind of building on a thesis that I've been developing during this research, which I'm excited to discuss. But just to start off, a couple of things as we go along. I tried to put some images here. This picture is not, but the remaining, I think almost all of them are photos that I took myself in Hampi in Vijayanagara. So this image here is visible today. If you go to Tirupati and just as you are about to enter the Garbhagriha, if you look back and to your right, you will see these three bronze images, sculptures there. So basically, Raya, Krishnadevaraya in the center, and flanked by his two wives, senior wife Chinna Devi, who is actually from this region, Tirumala, and then his junior wife Chinna Devi, who was the, as legend goes, the dancing girl who he met and fell in love with in his youth and remained his kind of true love. Interesting, though, that she did have a public presence, but of course, Chinna Devi was the senior wife, the political wife. But he traveled with all his wives to Tirupati on many occasions. He was a devout Sri Vaishnava. And so these three statues were put in there. Why I'm kind of making a point about this is because it's very rare in Indian history at this point, and of course even earlier we have very little, but to get portraited kind of images or figures. So we don't have many clear ways of knowing how someone looked unless, just from like a written description. So what's ironic though about these is, even as I'm saying that, this image of the king, kind of slender and long legs and that kind of thing, is not borne out by the historical sources that we have. So that gives another point that, we imagine ourselves a certain way, or devotees of the king, or would imagine him in a certain way, and that doesn't always match up with the real historical lived reality of a person. So anyway, a little bit of introduction to that. And here we go. Here's another. This image was used for a stamp, and in the background you can see images from Hampi. And Hampi, Vijayanagara was in Krishnadevaraya's time. That was the name of the city, the capital city of this empire. And today it is known as Hampi. So I'm sure many of you might have been there. If you have not, I highly recommend visiting Hampi, because this also gives rise to another, point I like to make about Indian history, is that Indian history is not like history in other parts of the world, particularly in the West. History in the Western sense is something that's past and gone, and it has its consequences and relationships to things that came before that. But in a sense, it's basically just a linear kind of thing, and it's something that's gone, and that's what the word past even means. But for us, bhutva, like in Sanskrit, like having been. So it was, and it doesn't have the sense that it has stopped being. You see what I'm saying? Like the past in India is alive now. Means, like, Hampi is a perfect example. Yes, you can say it's a forgotten city, it's a ruins, but ruins are also living things. I can go to Hampi, I can visit that place, I can walk amongst those, I can learn things, I can experience, and people still live there too. This is India. People live everywhere. You see, we have a whole different way of how to look at history and matlab time. Time fundamentally is cyclical in Indian thought, whereas it is fundamentally linear in most Western paradigms. So this gives a whole different sense of things. So him being a historical figure, again, he's just as relevant today. Some of the things we're going to talk about, just as relevant to going on, and in many ways, almost the same thing going on. So let me keep going. Like I said, my attraction and entrance into the life of this great king was actually my graduate work was mostly on literature, Tamil and Telugu, Sanskritam. But my thesis work was on Amuktamaliyada, which was a great Mahakavya. It's one of the great Pancha Mahakavyas of Telugu Sahitya. And it was written by the king himself. So not only was this man a great statesman and warrior, fighter, he was also a very talented poet, and really wrote, even by the literary standards, probably one of the greatest kavya of Telugu literature. I'm going to have to escape this so I can read all of this properly, but you can all still see the screen, right? Yeah. Okay. So, yeah. So the text itself, it's like I said, he was a devout Sri Vaishnava, and Amuktamaliyada is the story of Andal or Goda Devi. And in fact, Amuktamaliyada means, what do they call it? Chudakuritanachiar in Tamil, like the one who gives the garland which has already been put on and then taken off. He translated that and made it Amukta Malyada. So that's the one who gives the garland that has already been, or that has been taken off, basically, worn and taken off. Because, if you don't know the story of Andal, just very quickly, she's a Sri Vaishnava saint. She's an Alwar from Tamil Nadu. And she was always in love with Vishnu. Her father was Periyalvar. And he was the garland maker in this village, Viluputuru. And she used to take those garlands that he made and bring them to the temple. But on the way, she would pass by a well and put them on and look down into the well and imagine that she was reunited with her beloved, her Vishnu or Sriranga. And then she would give them to the local god there. And one day, Periyalvar found a hair there, and he said, well, what is this hair? And she said, I put these garlands on every day, and then I give them to him. And he, of course, he was so upset. He couldn't believe this. How could you give, offerings have to be pure. You can't just wear them and then give them. And then later on, this, what is his name? Well, the form of Vishnu at Viluputuru says, no, these, in fact, are the only garlands I want. So don't scold her and bring her here to Srirangam, and we'll have our, darshan, and then she gets married, and all of that happens. So it's a classic story of Sri Vaishnava Alvar poetry history, and reworked in the large kind of kavya style. So what's interesting about kavya style is it includes a lot of other things like descriptions of seasons, this thing, that thing. Also, and this is what's interesting for our purposes here, there's a whole section on Rajaniti, or, like governance. And 80 verses Raya gives on how to be a good leader, how to govern things. And I'll quote from that literature so you can get a sense. And here's one right here where he says, the root purpose of an expansive empire is the acquisition of wealth. But no matter how big your empire is, build tanks and canals for the benefit of farmers, ease taxes and grain revenues, be strong, and both artha and dharma will grow. This is the thing. We are now in a world where artha is dominating and dharma has gone, down, abhyudhanam adharmasya, like that's so artha and dharma are not, kind of mutually exclusive. In fact, you have to build both together. And that's the beauty, is that some of that, again, old wisdom, like the kind of wisdom you might have even seen in Arthashastra, are again not something of the past. They're reworked in this new vision that this man has, in the 16th century. And if I forgot to give the dates, Krishnadevaraya's ruling dates are 1509 to 1529. So right at the beginning of the 16th century, before the Mughals arrive in the north, and a very critical moment in not only Indian but world history, and we'll come to that later. All right. Okay. Yeah. So as I was saying, he was a kind of incredible statesman and also like warrior on the battlefield. He never lost a battle. Never. I don't think there's any battle that I know of that Krishnadevara fought and lost. He won them all. And yet he wrote this great kavya. He supported literature, art. He was supposed to have been a veena player. I mean, he's really like that kind of holistic king who is, all-rounder. So in India, we have that tradition, the Kavi Raja, the king who can also be a poet. And in the West, they have some of these ideas like philosopher kings, like people like Marcus Aurelius and those types of people, who could balance a sense of this philosophy of life, dharma, arts, all of that, humanities, with, strength, governance, politics, and not to see the two as kind of at odds with each other, but actually mutually, reinforcing. And that's exactly what you see now here, given in a poetic way. Now, these are the kinds of things where, again, Indian ways of recording our culture are different than other ways. This is a poem, and yet inside of this poem is that deep point. The deep point is that, you can't be a king and not a Raja. I mean, a Kavi. You can't be a philosopher, a king, without being a philosopher. I mean, a good king. So to like proper, leadership actually requires that sense of like humanity. But here it's described, in the form of like a, Ardhanarishwara, the Durga and Shiva coming together, or Parvati Shiva in one form. It's Shiva, it's Parvati, it's Shiva, Parvati, it's everything. And you need both to come together. So then this verse, "Oh, mighty Lord, King of kings, supreme sovereign of heroic splendor, united like the highest God, Parameshwara, half the goddess Durga, half the Lord of dance." And then this is the key line, Sahiti Samarangana Sarvabhauma, means this Sahiti in literature and Samara in the warfare, you are an emperor, Sarvabhauma, that idea again, strength and like compassion all together, a poetic sense of the world and a practical sense at the same time. Underlying this idea, again, the true Raja, Raja is just the one, he's Bhupala, he's just looking after the land, and the people are part of the land, and he is there just as the people are. This idea that there's a relationship between king and people as mutually symbiotic. Again, if you do well, there's a beautiful verse where he says, basically he's describing how to care for the empire by describing how he cares for his own body. So that the people are like the body of the king. So the way that someone takes care of their own body, that's how a king should take care of the people. So here's another verse from that Rajaniti section. "A king must listen to the cries of the destitute and care for their needs, whilst never entrusting such serious matters to cowards. He must always be ready to protect his people, for if a king keeps the welfare of the people in his heart, the people will care for the welfare of the king." That's that idea of this mutual relationship that exists between people and king. All right. So this is actually Hampi fairly recently. This is a picture that we were so lucky to get for the back cover of the book. I really loved it because, like I said, Hampi's, it's not, people still live there. people, Indian history is always in the present. That's basically what it is. And the nostalgia of things is, part of that sense of history, because you can't be nostalgic except in the present. Like you need that sense of life. So I just love this picture. And also I felt like I wanted to use it to reflect that idea of the connection between people and the empire. This is a picture I actually took myself, and I'm showing it just to describe a few different things. There's layers of history, again, even at Vijayanagara. So, in the foreground, next to the boulders, you see these older structures from like Chalukya times. Then you have this is the Virupaksha temple, the main tutelary deity of Vijayanagara. In the brown, you can see on the bottom part, and then of course the new remade Gopuram that you can see on the right. And then, of course, in the very foreground are these huge boulders. And these boulders are one of the most magical things about visiting Hampi. There's something very breathtakingly, haunting and like kind of mystical about it. And of course, as the tradition goes, and I'll read a little passage here, this is the land of Kishkinda. This is where Sugriva and all those guys were hanging out. And the hills that Vijayanagara is built around all have sacred stories about them, and you can read more about them. So here's some more of those hill pictures. So Vijayanagara was founded in the 14th century by Harihara and Bukka, who, again, this also shows like what was happening in India at this time, social mobility. It's not like these guys were from, long Kshatriya lineages or something. No, these are all like warrior clans and families that had come down post Kakatiya breakup and looking for new places to set up, and they have a very interesting history. That should be the prequel to Raya, should be all about those guys. But let me read this small passage. The realm that the upstart brothers had claimed for themselves was the mythical land of Kishkinda, ancient home of legendary monkey warriors of the Ramayana like Vali, Sugriva, and Hanuman. There, across the arid plain, flows the river Pampa, or Tungabhadra, gently coursing its way through barren expanses and breathtaking clusters of gargantuan boulders that appear to float in the sky. Harihara and Bukka's vision for their new dominion wasn't something preconceived. It arose from the rugged terrain before them, just as the city they would go on to build would seem to magically emerge from the rocky landscape. And one of the reasons I wanted to include these images also was because I tried to pick some of the more, ideas that I wanted to share that related to, military and defenses, because one of the key things of why they picked this place is because Vijayanagara, this huge city, is surrounded by basically a fortress of boulders. So the idea of using the natural landscape as a defensive barrier, defensive walls, was a critical reason why this was chosen. And yet you had perfect river access. And actually, in fact, there's an old citadel in Anagundi. If you cross the river and go up, you can see that side of things, which again, another older part of the history of that region. So I highly recommend visiting, because again, like I'm saying, you can go to these places. I took these pictures just like a few years back. Okay. Now, let me just take a sip before we talk about it. This is the map from the book, which my brother-in-law made, which I really like, with the icons. That I'll explain it in 1 second. So as I was mentioning, Krishnadevaraya, was born probably in the late 15th century. His reign is 1509 to 1529. So around 1500 is a really, really, I think, critical moment in world history. And this is what really makes it a global leader kind of idea. There's a philosopher or historian, think Jaspers is his name. And he uses that 500 BC as an axial age, and all of these interesting people like Pythagoras and Confucius and Buddha and all of these guys, Mahavira, are around. I think 1500 is like another 2,000 years after. I think you get another very interesting moment, because at least from our perspective, Vasco da Gama is the first European and ostensibly at least in this period to arrive in India. And by 1510, which is just 12 years, talk about the Portuguese and their navy. This was the key thing, had taken Goa. And by that time, they had also, on their way, taken all these other ports along the way. So there was this connection going on all the way. And this 1500, this critical moment, this is the beginning, basically, of what we would consider like the colonial period. And that defines a very important shift. And that shift, again, has to do with what, in the scholarly community, they call epistemology, but like ways of knowing things. And like history is one of those things. Like history is a way that we know ourselves and our identity. And this thinking of the West, of this linear idea of progressive history, past, present, future, linear time, all of that starts to come into Indian discourse. And I mean, for whatever it is, we're still in that modality of thinking in India. We haven't, the beauty of India is that there are still people who follow that more old system, but for the most part, as a nation, we're moving along those lines. Okay, so enough about that. Let's look at like the main players in Krishnadevaraya's time. In red is Vijayanagara right there on the banks of the Tungabhadra. And like I said, the Portuguese have just taken Goa. So they're out there to the west. And then to the north, you have the Bahmanis. So you have a whole other cultural stream of influence and at this time in the Deccan. The Persianate influence in the Deccan is very strong. So the Bijapur, Bidar, Golconda, Ahmednagar, all of these, were the breakdown of the Bahmanis into these 5 splinter places. And each one, particularly Bijapur, was in some kind of, tussle, a negotiation of, space and territory with Vijayanagara for, almost the beginning of their founding. So that is honestly a big area of discussion, which we can have. But let me just say this very clearly. And I know, again, part of like learning history is what we're taught. And so a lot of history about Vijayanagara is it was this great empire. And then, it was holding on to, the ancient Hindu ways before the onslaught of Islam into the south. And, this is not exactly true. If you look at history, there was a lot of cross, fertilization, you could say, between. In fact, one of the Bijapur daughters married a Vijayanagara prince, before Vijayanagara. So there was a lot more, connection between all of these things, and it wasn't so much just a religious war. But we can get into, the details of that if people want. But I'll continue more with some interesting other points. So the last player are the Gajapatis, and they're basically on the east coast of India. And honestly, if you read the literature and even read what Krishnadevaraya wrote about himself, his main antagonism and his biggest enemy that he fought, for 7 years, he fought a huge campaign, was against the Gajapati, who was, of course, a Hindu king. But that was an important battle because it kind of reclaimed what was the traditional Vijayanagara territory, everything south of the Krishna River. So anyway, these are the four main, players that are in touch. And one other thing about
Sridharan sir, kindly mute yourself.
So, yeah, just one other point about the international part. Bijapur, Golconda, all of them, there was a heavy influx of Persian, fighters, warriors, poets, whatever, people, workers in the court. All of this stuff was a way that, and the kind of Islamicization, that's what they talk about in the scholarship, of courtly practices at this time was intensified by this, influx of new cultures. So I'm just bringing that up to just so how complex and multicultural, India is, of course, throughout its history. But at this point, very interesting is a lot of people that were not, let us say, indigenous to India were also coming there. All right. Now, this is a little section of the presentation about horses, because horses at that time, for military purposes, horses were like tanks. Horses were like the most important military advantage you can have. Basically, there was a simple formula: if you had more horses, you'd win. So getting horses was absolutely the number one priority of all of these kings. It was basically, getting these arms, and really what we're going to see is an arms race, because as I was mentioning, the Portuguese had captured all these ports. So they had all the ports that would bring in these West Asian horses. The Indian horses were not good. The land routes were not, the northern land routes were not available. So the only way to get these horses in from West Asia was through these ships. And these ships were now, and these ports and the shipping ways were all controlled by the Portuguese. So the Portuguese became these great mediators of this incredibly, sought after military need. And that was having these powerful horses. So even in Raya's own Amuktamaya, the section, he talks about this exact need. So he says, promote trade by providing for ports and encouraging the sale of horses, wild elephants, jewels, perfume, pearls, and more. So quite a lot more too, but the horses was the first thing. And then here, I believe a very direct reference to the Portuguese horse traders that were there at Vijayanagara. Merchants from distant lands who import elephants and war horses. Well, the elephants is not pertinent, but usually it's like a dwandwa, they usually come together. Gajashva. Should be kept in imperial service at the capital, treat them with prestige, and provide them with towns and mansions. And there's a whole section where this Portuguese group of musketeers and horse traders was invited to Vijayanagara. You could read all about it. So I feel like this is an exact direct reference. And if you see these, look at these carvings. This is from the Vittala temple in Hampi. And you can really see, of a distinct Portuguese looks and dress there that you don't see in the other images. So it's amazing that, all of this is already again, this is our history. There you have to look at these, the bas reliefs of temples to find Indian history. It might not be in a text, let's say, or written by a historian, but they're there. You just have to look in a different way. So this is another verse when Raya is talking about cavalrymen, and he says, soldiers need 2 stirrups to mount their tall stallions, these mighty swift steeds from Persia, Balkh, Herat, and Khotan. And, this is, again, from an ostensible, poetic kavya work, but there's deep history that's encoded in there. And we have to read it as such. And this is exactly, in fact, the kind of routes and places that these horses were coming from. So you can see they're all coming from West Asia. Hormuz was another important port that the Portuguese had taken. So all of that stuff, now all of the sea trade, now the Portuguese completely diverted everything to Goa. So all of those ports that they controlled and all the other Indian ports on the west coast, everything was now flowing into Goa. Like Bhatkal was another one. Now everything was flowing to Goa. And from Goa, Bijapur and Vijayanagara. So the Portuguese were creating an arms race. So they would tell Vijayanagara, we'll sell you this many horses for this much. And then they would go to same Bijapur and say, we're going to sell this many for this much. And like that, they would bargain and try to get the highest bidding price. So this is the kind of stuff that still goes on today, you know. And these people are happy because they know that when a war is going on, you'll be wanting to defeat your enemy. You need this kind of stuff. It was quite intense how divisive the Portuguese were, and that kind of behavior, of course, we still see in corporate practices today. This Portuguese horse merchant, his name was Cristóbal de Figueiredo, and this is what he says. But he replied that the whole business of Portuguese was war. Their whole purpose was to do that. And he said this flat out. And this is Raya now giving even more verses on the importance of horses. And again, this is a long, beautiful bas relief panel from Hampi. Protect your stables at all times and keep them well stocked with the best fodder, and trust the care of finely bred horses and elephants to skilled and loyal servants only, never to your lords. When buying elephants, horses, or fodder, paying the salaries of good soldiers, honoring Brahmins, or indulging in personal pleasures, expense is not waste, it is gain. I put that into just a transition to a little bit about money and how important it was in finances to buy horses and keep them. Horses, and to keep them as the most important military, power that they could develop. Vijayanagara, of course, was very rich, and oftentimes there's actually a verse. I'm surprised I didn't keep it in here, but Raya even says, "Outbid your competitors," because you have to. And those competitors he's talking about is Bijapur. So he was a good businessman. He'd be paid for what he needed to ensure that kind of military power. These are the famous Gajashalas. Maybe some Ashwashalas in there too, but this is a Gajashala that's still there in Vijayanagara. It's one of the most impressive architectural things you can see. And Raya says it there in another one of his verses. Even if it is big, a quarter of the budget should go to the king's gifts and pleasures, half, the largest share, half to maintain a powerful military, and a fourth to the treasury vault. So a fourth you put in savings, a fourth he uses for all his wining and dining and all this stuff, but half of the budget went to the military. Okay, these are going to be a couple images, and then I'm going to read a little bit from the book, and then we can have questions and discussion. These are all images from the city section of Hampi. On the right there, top right, you can see, of course, I'm not sure if that's Telugu or Kannada. It might be Telugu, actually. No, it might be Kannada. But clearly there's Devanagari on the bottom and Kannada on the top, and there'd be many other languages used, well, depending on where you were. But just to show the kind of, again, multilinguistic nature of a place like, Vijayanagara at that time. You had Tamil kings, Kannada speaking, Telugu speaking. Raya was actually a Tulu, supposedly by birth. I didn't get into the whole discussion about Raya's parentage, but we can get into that later. The other images you see are these relief panels, which are really amazing, that show different things like that Maha Navami festival that is discussed quite a bit in the Portuguese sources And, you know, you have the horses, you have camels, you have dancing girls, you have, you know, so because this great festival that would happen every year was also the time when officers and lords from everywhere would come to Vijayanagara. This is when their salaries would be paid. This is when they would have a big parade and kind of show off everything. So there was a great kind of, you know, what they call in the scholars of theater state, but, you know, a kind of spectacular, you know, festival that combined, you know, the economic payment of these salaries, the, you know, display of military might, and then like great arts and entertainment and fun and all of that. So, and religious services. So all of it together, you know, you can just imagine what that would have been like back then. These are some other beautiful images from Hampi of the architecture. Now, I just wanted to, I'll end here because there's so much to talk about, but I wanted to read a section that I thought might be of interest to, you know, you all. And this is about probably one of the most famous and I think one of the most well talked about battles in medieval and ancient, the Battle of Raichur. Raichur is right in between. You know, there's a little doab, there's a little like strip of land between the Tungabhadra and the Krishna, and this Raichur is there, and it was always a bone of contention between Bijapur and Vijayanagara. They've been fighting back and forth, one taking it, one reclaiming it like that over and over again, many times for years. And at the present time, at least that we're at, it was in the hands of Bijapur, and so Raya had led an attack to reclaim it. What was I going to say? Well, I'll read. Okay. The region's headquarters was the coveted stronghold of Raichur, positioned on a conspicuous hill that rose like a woman's breast upon the earth. The city itself was surrounded by an impenetrable stone wall, built with 3 compact layers of heavy masonry. As historian Ritter Eden comments, with their massive slabs of finely dressed granite, these walls were, in their own day, considered an engineering marvel. Even today, some local residents regard them as the work of gods, not men. The fort was also equipped with an imposing gate, an outer moat, and several high and strong stone towers, erected so close together that one could hear words spoken from one to the other. The citadel was no doubt well defended, almost impossible to take in a frontal assault, but it was also well provisioned, making the prospect of a siege appear hopeless. Atop the hill was said to be a mysterious spring which flowed with fresh water all year round. The locals thought it blessed, for even in their lofty position, they never wanted for water. The small garrison inside consisted of 8,000 foot soldiers, 400 horses, and 20 elephants, and they were confident they could survive a prolonged siege, even if it should last for 5 years. Krishnadevaraya's only way forward was to suffer the unavoidable loss of life that would accompany any attempt to penetrate the ramparts of Raichur. Most threatening of all were the fort's catapults, which hurled heavy stones and did great damage. To boot, many well-armed artillery patrolled the walls at every hour, ever ready to fire upon would-be attackers. Nunes, that's the Portuguese chronicler, counted no less than 200 pieces of heavy artillery, not to mention small ones. Rifles, guns, and cannons were not new to the subcontinent. They had slowly made their way into India even before Europeans had. But according to Eaton, the Battle of Raichur witnessed South Asia's earliest significant appearance of cannon, whether used offensively as field artillery or used defensively on the battlements of forts. And it was the earliest known appearance of matchlock firearms. Indeed, the imminent Battle of Raichur would come to represent a transitional phase in the military history of South Asia and a critical moment in the diplomatic history of the Deccan. One reason for this unique distinction is that the 1520 Battle of Raichur remains one of the most well-documented military engagements in pre-modern South Asian history. Much of the detailed information we have comes from Nunes, whose account of the battle reads like an eyewitness account. Reading the fine details makes one feel that Nunes must have been present for all the breathtaking action. The description that follows is largely taken from his chronicle, and you can go and read all about that in the book. So with that, I will say thank you. Dhanyavadam. Please feel free to email me anytime. Thank you. Please enjoy the book. I put my heart and soul into it. So great. I will stop the screen now and would love to engage with any questions, comments.
Thank you very much, Dr. Srinivas Reddy, for a very interesting, insight into Krishnadevaraya's empire. I mean, really, you spoke with a lot of passion about this. Now, we will start the question and answer session. Normally, I do start asking the questions, but I think I'll first, members, kindly unmute yourself and ask the questions. And I'm sure Wing Commander Sudarshan has got a few questions. Okay, Mr. Reddy, first, I think I'll ask you the first question. So, the basic thing is that how much of research you had to do, for writing a book like this? How much of effort did it involve? And what are your basic sources from where you collected all this, information that, ended up with you writing this beautiful book?
Right. Thank you, sir. Excellent question. I wanted to talk about sources and I didn't get a chance. Well, like I said, I've been working on it for a long time in the sense that I worked on the Amuktamaya for my thesis work and the history that goes along with that. But the actual writing of the book Raya and like compiling all the sources, which I kind of had to reread again, it took about 2 years to do that. And the main source, absolutely the number one source for Vijayanagara history is a book called, the book is called A Forgotten Empire by Sewell. It was written in 1900, but the bulk of Sewell is based on a translation of the chronicles of 2 Portuguese horse traders. One, who we just read, was actually there and met Krishnadevaraya and Nunes, because they give us more information than anybody else. It's amazing the kind of detail. So I have to say that those are the most important ones. I think what made in addition to that, of course, we have sources like, the archaeology, the coinage. I used a lot of inscriptions, like particularly from Tirupati and whatnot. But the thing I think that makes my study of Raya unique was that I integrated that information and the poetic stuff that he himself wrote from Amuktamayada. So that was, and I used other Indian kavyas as historical source materials, which I was kind of trying to say is that wasn't always done by Western historians or even Indian historians. So using poetry as also another source of history was my unique, I think, probably contribution.
So most of your... Sorry for that. Sorry for that. So that leads me to the next question is that, would it be correct to say that most of there are very few Indian authors who write about Indian history and you had to depend upon, especially for this particular effort, that you had to depend upon foreign authors, foreign writers?
Are you talking about in terms of primary literature? Yes. When we say that we didn't have like history, or people say that, it's somewhat true in that narrow sense that we didn't have like historians or that genre or discipline of writing in India until the modern period. But like I said, you have to look at all of these other sources. So in one way, I only looked at Indian sources like at the primary level, but in the terms of secondary scholarship, a lot of that actually does come from the West. But, actually, let me take that back. the Portuguese stuff is non-Indian primary source material that's very important. So yeah, I don't want to say I couldn't rely on Indian sources, but I can't downplay the importance of the Portuguese sources. They're really important.
Okay. We have a question from one of our YouTube viewers, Mr.
Okay.
Robert Felke. The question is, what led to the transition of power to the next rule? He's talking about Krishnadevaraya. What led to the transition of power to the next ruler?
So after Krishnadevaraya, what happened? Basically, is that the question? I think. Well,
yeah.
The end of Raya's life is shrouded in mystery. There's a very famous story about him blinding his beloved minister Timarasu. And then we find that Raya died of something that they say groin pain. So maybe like prostate or some issue he had. But the key thing that happens is before he dies, he does like a pattabhisheka for his young son, who then later is murdered. So there's a lot of court intrigue that starts happening. We don't know why or he's not murdered, but he dies suddenly right during the middle of the festival. So his son-in-law, Rama Raya, he's the one who kind of acts as like the regent, I think. But we know that this is a man who is very, power hungry from the beginning. You could say was of course Raya's friend, but was certainly always in search of power, and probably basically, I don't know, but acted as a regent, but basically had taken control over the thing. And then this is what leads into, and then it's during his reign that the Battle of Talikota happens, and like the ostensible death of Vijayanagara, at least as a city, happens when all 5 of the Bhamanis come and attack Vijayanagara. So that's what happened afterwards. I mean, there is some post Talikota Vijayanagara, the whole Aravidu dynasty, but they moved the capital further south into Chandragiri and into that region. But yeah, the post Raya, it's like a pretty quick demise after the great peak that Raya had brought us to.
Okay. Now, there's a question from Mrs. Pramila Rajan, one of our members. She wants to know if your books are available as ebook to be read on iPad.
Yes, I think all the books should be available as ebooks, definitely.
Okay.
The first 3 books were by Penguin, and I think they should be all available. I'm not sure in India; it's also different, so I can't always check. But definitely the Juggernaut one, the Raya, the biography. I think you have to get their reader, but yeah, I think it's very much available in e-form. Thank you.
I have a question.
The next question for you is from our veteran member, Colonel Balaswamy. He wants to know, he says that recently the TTD declared Tirupati Anjadari Hill as the birthplace of Hanuman and not Kishkinda. Your comments?
I think that's fine. I don't think Hanuman was born in Kishkinda. I think he just lived in Kishkinda. So if they want to claim Anjana there, no problem. You see, but the real truth of the matter is, again, a point about India. Space also is like cyclical. It's folding out. How many Anjanas are there? Hundreds, man. I mean, every place I can find 10 Anjanas, 10 Vaikunthas, 10. I mean, that's what India is. My Vaikuntha is the real one. Your Vaikuntha is also real for you. No problem. Okay.
Yeah, right. Okay. Now, Colonel Vishwanathan, sir, kindly ask a question, sir.
Yeah, I just want to know, what is the language of the courts during Krishnadevaraya's time?
Yeah,
and what language did he write his poems?
Yeah, exactly. That's a huge discussion, sir, about language diversity. But he wrote in Telugu, and he has that very famous line in Amuktamayada, which is still, Telugu people quote today, Desha Bhasha Landu Telugu Lessa. But we forget the line that comes before that. He says, Yella Nurpula Kolovan Eragave Basadi. And this is the key point. So all the kings, all your lords that had gathered in the Sabha, after you heard them speaking, Eragave, didn't you realize? Deshabashalandu Telugu Lessa means what? Like I was saying, a lot of these guys were coming from Kakatiya times. So a lot of the lords were actually Telugu speaking. They might be in Karnataka, they might be some in Tamil Nadu, they might be in Andhra, whatever you want to call. But Telugu seemed to be the dominant language of most of the lords at that time that were his court. Therefore, my point is Telugu was the most politically expedient language for him to use. And therefore, it became dominant. He wrote his Kavya in Telugu, although he was also writing in Sanskritam. So Telugu at that particular moment was important. At the same time, all these Ashtadiggajalu, they were all multilingual poets too. And he sponsored a lot of, Sanskrit, Tamil, Kannada poets also. So, everything is good, but Telugu was kind of like the language of politics.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Wing Commander Sudarshan has got some questions for you. Wing Commander Sudarshan, kindly. Krishna Swami, sir, I'll come back to you after Vinko Sudarshan's questions. Vinko Sudarshan, you can ask your question, please.
Good evening, everyone. Hello, Srinivas Reddy, sir. Excellent research from you, and the book, definitely I'll get hold of it and read it. There is no question. I just want to share some of my experience regarding Hampi. See, I am from a place just 5 hours drive from Hampi. I never went there. While I was in the Air Force, of course, after I left the Air Force 3 years ago, I decided to visit there. But the reason why I never wanted to go there, why would anyone waste their holidays to go and see ruins? That was the kind of, especially in the Air Force, when we come out on a very restricted holiday, you get that feeling. But 3 years ago, I just went there. First thing, whatever was filled in our, preconceived ideas about Hampi is Hampi, the ruins. But by the time I reached the resort, I found everything is so green and prosperous. So that is the time I kind of surprised. Hampi is not the one that everyone gives you that impression. And I spent about a week there. And I found that each stone has a story to tell. And I was a man possessed from there on. Then I wrote this book in Kannada, Hasiru Hampi. That is evergreen Hampi.
Yeah.
And the person who wrote a forward to this book and released this book is called S.L. Bhairappa. Most of his books are translated into 14 Indian languages. So what he told me is, you have taken a very nice slice of history of Hampi, but you should start from beginning and do not count the books that you are going to write. So I started writing more books about Hampi. Now I started with the Udayavaitu Vijayanagara. That means the beginning of the Vijayanagara. So I'm almost completing it. I have to, due to this Corona. In fact, during this Corona, we went to Hampi and sat there for 1 month. It was the most safest place to be there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe I will contact you through the mails. I need some more material from you.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for your very in-depth knowledge.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Vinko Sudarshan. Yes, Krishna Swami, sir. Colonel Krishna Swami has got a question for you.
Good evening, Mr. Srinivas Reddy. You are a professor in the US. I just wanted to know, you are doing this research and you have written so many books. What are the interests that has been shown by the students community there in the US for learning Indian history and Indian heritage and the truth about whether it is left-oriented, right-oriented, and all those controversies that we are having. Are they in search of truth, or are they wanting to say that they are biased? What sort of a feeling that you get there when you see and probably are supporting certain theses also from your students? What is your impression about them?
Well, I mean, I taught in 6 years. My first position was in Ahmedabad. So I taught at IIT for 6 years. And then I've been here for about 5 years. And I'll say, honestly, it's not about where the school is. It could be a school in America. It could be a school in Europe. It could be a school in India. It doesn't matter. But what we have to look at is that those top schools, anywhere, they all share a certain discourse of academic opinion and an academic language and their own canon, which is heavily defined by Western scholarship and rooted in Western ideas and Western philosophies. There are not many people, even in India. I mean, look, if you're in India and you say, I'm going to go study Indian studies, everyone looks at you like a fool. You should be a doctor, engineer, whatever. So no one's supporting their kids to go and study Indian history. But regardless, in either case, in India and here, there's very few people who are, approaching Indian history the way I think it should be approached. That is through its own lens, through its own language, through its own historians. I mean, like I'm saying, Krishnadevaraya is a historian, boss. But the Kavya he doesn't mean that he's just a fanciful poet. This is a man, this is a scholar, this is a statesman who wrote something. That's history. Why are we not reading that as history? So, the best schools in America and in India all think the same. That's what I'm trying to say. And we need more new kind of thinking coming in. And that requires Indians supporting Indian types of thinking, because the West will never support that. They will never do that. It requires us Indians, but we don't do that. We will never want our student, our son or daughter to go and get PhD in Prakrit studies. Nobody wants that for their kid. You know what I mean? So unless we value ourselves, whole world will be able to devalue us. This is my whole principle. We need to value our culture as so important and wonderful, because the other sad reality is, if you want to read kind of what Wing Commander Harshvardhan is saying, if you look at the secondary scholarship, we're relying heavily on Western scholarship because we're just not getting, good work being done out of India. So if you want to do research on Vijayanagara, you have to read all those guys, and they're good. I mean, they're no problem. So,
but do you feel that there are some distortions in them?
There are distortions everywhere, sir. That's what I'm trying to say.
But if there are distortions, are there anyone with your, shall we say, standing to give a retort or shall we say rebut it, or give a different version? Are there any authors like you who have given some different views on the subject?
There are, but again, when you start going like that, then it just becomes like this fight. I didn't want to have any fights with anybody. I just want to put the book out. You put a good book out, and you have to have faith that like people with a good mind, a balanced mind will. Because I've gotten critique from my book from Indians. I mean, one guy called and said, you won't believe the kind of stuff he said. Because I'm talking about multiculturalism, I'm saying, different things, and people don't like it, Then I get critique from this side that says, "Arey yaar, he's just using these Telugu kavya and he's just kind of writing all this stuff, But so you can't win. So the better not to play any of those silly games and just do what you think is good work and put it out there. And you have a faith that like people that will get it. If they don't, chalo yaar, no problem."
Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you.
Yeah.
There's a question for you from Wing Commander Arun Kumar. He wants to know what was the expanse of Vijayanagara kingdom at its peak?
Yeah. So I would say pretty much by Raya's time, you could say that Raya held at least some, maybe not so much tight in Kerala and that side of Tamil Nadu, but for the most part, you know, let us say from Krishna to Tamraparni was clearly under Raya's dominion. Everything. Because remember, there was the Gajapati campaign that reclaimed everything on that coastal Andhra side, you know, so, and the South was fairly secured early on in his reign. So, especially because he married this Tirumala Devi. See, that's a perfect example of these political alliances, you know, that strengthen or marriage alliances that strengthen these political things. So, yeah, pretty much, you know, you could say at the peak of Vijayanagara, maybe at 1530, everything south of the Krishna was kind of in some way connected to Vijayanagara.
Thank you.
Harsha,
Yes,
Dr. Reddy, thank you. You know, I'm reading your book. What I could make out, firstly, Krishnadevaraya was an excellent warrior. He was an excellent horseman, and he had the courage to be leading into battles all the time. I mean, we can find that he's all the time leading into battle. And in fact, in one of the battles, he went on his own because his own army was not happy with something. And finally, he found that early morning when he was charging towards the battlefield, his whole cavalry was with him. And he was that courageous guy. But what I could make out was in his 20 years of reign, he was constantly at war. And he was always, going from north to south, to east to west. And in fact, some of the sieges sieges of forts lasted almost 6 months. So he was constantly at war. Is that true?
Well, in the early phase, yes. So until let's say until 1520, it was constant war on the road, here, there, and everywhere. But towards the end there, we don't have much information. We don't have a clear record of battles. So that's why I always say it was probably around 1520 where he wrote Amuktanada, where he actually had time to sit and be in Vijayanagara and develop that kind of cultural splendor that he had. So towards the end, it seemed like there was a little bit of some years where he was at home.
He was merciless in battle, what I could make out. He was cruel at times, but he was very compassionate to the defeated, especially the women and the queen and of the defeated kingdom. He was. But more importantly, he had a Chanakya-like minister, Timarasu. Yeah. And I think he was his philosopher and guide.
Yeah, absolutely. And almost like a father figure. So that's what makes that ending even more poignant. But yeah, without Timarasu, he couldn't have done it. I mean, he was the ultimate advisor, you know, shrewd, kind, compassionate, strong, and stern when he needed to be. Yeah.
And I think also during his reign, his humble beginnings was actually playing up, because he was not from the upper caste. He was very humble beginnings, and that played up as well.
Yes, that's exactly right. We didn't get into all of that, but Krishnadevaraya certainly was not from, again, an ostensible large Kshatriya background. In fact, if you really look at all of these guys, like I'm saying, post Kakatiya, even the beginning, Harihara and Bukka, they're not some big guys either. I mean, so this is all this period of social mobility, particularly in the Deccan, when you have well, let's put it this way. There's a very funny line between peasant agrarian movements, warrior groups, and these, government kind of formations. So there's a lot of diversity, let me put it that way, caste-wise, in terms of who was ruling and who had these kinds of local power centers. So anyway, Raya comes from, a Tulu background. Maybe some legends say, there's a legend, you can read about it in the book, and that, he was his father had been with a Dasi, and then this Gajapati goes on calling him Dasi Putra, and so that gets played up, and so a lot of animosity, especially in the movie literature and kind of folk literature, is that Raya was the Dasi Putra, and this guy was a big Kshatriya, and so he felt that Raya was below him and all this kind of stuff. But you can read about this in the book, because I there's some interesting stories in there. And later, of course, when he defeats Gajapati, Gajapati gives his daughter to Raya to marry, so that becomes his third wife. And there's some interesting, again, myths and legends about what happens to her. Or if you watch the Telugu movie Mahamantri Timurasu, there's some interesting stuff about that in that.
Very nice book, actually. I'm enjoying reading
it. Thank you.
Wing Commander Sudarshan has raised his hand once again. Wing Commander Sudarshan, kindly ask your question, please. You are muted.
Not lowered his hand.
Wing Commander Sudarshan. Okay, right. Any questions from anyone else, please?
Oh.
Right, sir. Thank you very much. It's been a good time for us listening to you. And I'm not sure really today, how much of our history books in the school reflect about the achievements of Krishnadevaraya, because generally people say that today in the school books, the content with respect to Indian history is very less. And I hope these type of books that you write, sort of brings an awakening, and people feel the need that these are the contents that should be featured in the history books in schools. Thank you very much for a very interesting talk. It has been great. It's our pleasure to have you had on our show this morning, and we wish you all the very best. And now I request our President M. Marshal Varthaman to close the show with his final words. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Harsha. I think Harsha has made a very interesting point, and that is, decolonization. Let me say. You see, the thing is, as far as the Indian military is concerned, we read about the wars of all, more Western oriented, and do not read about the great leaders that our own country has produced. So there is a talk going on. I don't know how far it is true. I've read it in the press that it is time that we switched away from Clausewitz and all these strategies, and we have our Chanakya, and we have so much of our leaders and thinkers and warriors and campaigns that need to be read in our country. And this kind of Indianization is something nice to, at least in our sunset years, it's nice to see this Indianization coming up, and being proud of what our own leaders and kings have done. And to that extent, I think your book Raya is an awakening, and it really is an awakening. And the other day, in fact, this week only, I was giving a talk on military leadership to what you call an organization in Bombay. And one of the persons there, one well-learned person, he said, of course, he left it as a mystery. He said, one of the greatest military leaders in the world, it is recognized by the world, is one guy from South India. Okay, so, and everybody was shooting names. So I said Krishnadevaraya, and so many they talked. But of course, he finally did not disclose. But I'm told it is a finding. It is a finding that one of the greatest military leaders is from here. So these are things that we don't know about. And it is time that we got out of this kind of influence, be proud of our own heritage, learn more about us. And definitely, when we do our own strategizing and our own philosophies and our own heritage and culture gets in, I think our, what do I say, strategies will be much, much better. Exactly like the Chinese. The Chinese don't talk about anybody else. It is their own culture. It is their own upbringing. And it's their own saying that, listen, I'm the head of the world. Everybody is inferior to me. He grows up on that concept. So I'm glad you are giving us an awakening on this. And I wish you more power to your pen or your keyboard. May you continue to write more and more and bring up our own Indianness. Let us be more proud of it. I thank you very much, Doctor, for spending time with us. And we will let you get on with your weekend. It's just the beginning of the weekend for you. We wish you the very best. And from all of us here, thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And thank you to all of you for really, I meant what I said earlier. Amazing. Thank you for your service.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you.